Our next question will begin with Mr. Upton. Can you name a government program that you support, you think is worthwhile, but that you would be willing to reduce spending for in order to reach a compromise on comprehensive deficit reduction?
You know, I can. I believe that, and I was a member of the super committee, as many of you know, everything has to be on the table. That included revenues, and we did. Sorry to say that we didn't get the necessary votes to get it done. But we need to look at all of the, on the spending side as well. Yes, there ought to be some things that we shouldn't be cutting. Medicare is one that we should not be cutting. I don't believe in that. But as you look at specifics, I think that every program we have to analyze and determine whether or not, as part of the trillions of dollars we spend in discretionary spending, that they measure up to the test. I, for one, have believed that we ought to be pulling our troops out of Afghanistan. I voted to do that last year. Bin Laden was gone. We're spending more than $100 billion there. We just saw Karzai dump a third of his governors. Many of them were honest. Obviously, there are a number of them that are corrupt as well. And it's time to bring our troops home from there. It's $100 billion savings that we can score. I voted to take those troops home, but I was on the losing side. And they're there. President Obama has indicated that he wants to bring those troops home by the end of 2014. I'd like to think that that can happen on a faster scale, and that's a big chunk of change, $100 billion.
Mr. O'Brien, same question for you. Can you name a government program that you support, but you'd be willing to reduce spending for?
Yep, that's easy. I would say education. There's nothing more important, very few things in this country that are more important than education. Education is what's going to create the basis for those good and meaningful jobs. Ask a business owner anywhere and they'll tell you that their number one priority is finding good employees. They don't talk much about this, that, or the other thing. Finding good employees is one of their highest priorities. There are a lot of redundant programs in the Department of Education. There are a lot of requirements that are actually burdening school districts, schools, and teachers. We can reduce some of that. There's duplicative programs. We can reduce that. So I would look to bring down those costs and put more of that money directly into the hands of the teachers of the schools and the infrastructure to actually educate our students.
And Mr. O'Brien, what is the most important investment this country should be making to assure the well-being of our children?
Education is the most important thing that this country can do. We need to put all the chips on the table with regard to education, and that's education K through 12. It's an emphasis on education in our colleges and in our universities. It's an emphasis on continuing education for adults and workers, the union halls and others that continue to educate people as they come out of jobs and lose jobs. It starts at K and it goes on. That's not about big government. I already talked about how there are multiple programs within the Department of Education, that big behemoth in Washington, that can be cut. It can be streamlined. We can save billions of dollars. But those dollars need to go back into the schools and classrooms. One of the big mistakes that I think we make in our middle schools, elementary schools, high schools, is this top-down, burdensome approach that we put on our teachers and administrators in schools. This concept that every student should learn the same way and every student should test the same way. There's no two students that are the same way. I happen to find my beautiful daughter to be one of the smarter students I've ever met. But you know, let's be honest. We need to spread that. We need to invest more, not just in the concrete skills that we have to have, like math, science, English, and the other core curricula, but I would argue that we need to also invest in things like music and art and other. The folks in this room, we are folks, right, in the larger sense, that put a man on the moon, that invented the internet, that's fighting and finding the cure for cancer. How did we do it? No offense to the young folks in the room, but how did you and I and all of us do it? We had an education system that balanced those things. Yes, test. Yes, make sure that schools are doing the same thing, but first make sure that every school has the same resources and that every school has a balanced curricula. Then you train the workers of the future, and this continues to be the greatest nation on earth.
Thank you. Mr. Upton.
I've always been a strong supporter of education. particularly higher education. And I was one that joined with a bipartisan coalition to make sure that interest rates did not double for our students earlier this summer. This morning I attended a pretty large group of educators across a couple different counties, superintendents, school board members, a whole number of different area legislators. We have to make sure that we're educating our kids for the jobs that we have today. And we got to make sure that vocational education is part of that. As we have begun to see a change, a positive change in Michigan, particularly in the manufacturing side of things, as I go to businesses, they're in the hunt for qualified folks. They want the tool and die makers. They want the welders. They want folks that they can provide a pretty good salary to, and yet the training doesn't seem to be there. We need to encourage our local school districts to really sit down with employers to talk about the needs that those employers have for the students that are moving through that course. We have to make sure that, in fact, the higher education dollars are there. When I was going to a state school, my tuition was $330 a semester. That's a big change from where we are today. I want to make sure, and I've always fought to make sure, that every family has the ability to send their son or daughter on to higher education, regardless of the school that they choose, so that they can be a productive member, if they decide, of that society and the interest that they want to pursue. There is a role for the government to play, and as we look to compete with the rest of the world, we've got to have the talent that's ready to do that.
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, 1 minute.
I mean, no offense, Congressman, but after 26 years, a quarter of a century in office, I don't see those bold measures. I don't see that call consistently through that time. We need more investment in our schools. So I would ask you if you would join me in calling for the removal of any budget cuts for education in the House Ryan budget, because those cuts are coming. We already see what's happening at the state level when our education system here in Michigan is being decimated. The resources have to be put back in place. Those resources will grow when the state grows, when we do the things that I've talked about, like bringing infrastructure, manufacturing, and wind energy jobs to the district. People will pay their taxes, the coffers will rise, and we'll have more. But we need to do more at the national level, and I would ask you to join me in making sure that nothing in the House budget, changing anything that's in there, which is in there, and put the money back into education rather than removing it.
Thank you, Mr. Upton.
Again, I have a long history of supporting our educators, and it did so again in the continuing resolution that passed with broad bipartisan support that I voted for this last month. We want to make sure that the dollars are there. Education is very important, whether it be Title I, helping our disadvantaged students in school districts across the country, or whether it be higher education. We've got to make sure that the resources are there. My record is a strong one. I look to continue that support as we look through these different budget wars that we endure from year to year.
Okay.